This video is for The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which is a screenplay by Rod Serling. So this video is giving you the background information to the playwright, Rod Serling. He's responsible for writing The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. And it gives you some information about what was going on in his lifetime that inspired the story. So who is Rod Serling? Rod Serling was a playwright for the television series known as The Twilight Zone. This was popular in the 1950s. Serling was born in Syracuse, New York in 1924. And after he graduated high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. He was hoping to fight Nazis in World War II. He became a paratrooper in the Pacific Theater instead, and he was eventually awarded the Purple Heart for receiving a wound. Growing up in a working-class family and fighting in World War II really affected Serling. He became disillusioned with society, and he was really concerned with a moral society, or lack thereof. And after he was done fighting in the war, he went back to school to major in education, but he decided that he wanted to change his major to English because he wanted to address his ideas with more creative expression. He wanted to be able to affect people on a wider range than just in school. So once he graduated from college, he began writing teleplays for conservative television networks. Now, he wanted to cover societal issues that he found important. He wanted to talk about things like lynchings, union organizations, racism, but his network felt that these ideas would be too controversial, and so they would not let him talk about such things. So eventually he left these networks to focus on work that he found really important, and that's how he created the Twilight Zone. So fun fact, if you've ever been to Disney World, love Disney World, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, right here, is inspired by the show. And right before the ride drops, it plays the show's intro, and you can see the picture here. So Serling created this science fiction fantasy television show called The Twilight Zone, and it features people in these really extraordinary situations. He has things like time travel, aliens, the apocalypse, things that are just incredibly unusual. And he found that using fantasy made it easier for him to focus on moral and political questions of the time. This using fantasy and science fiction allowed him to focus on these things without the censorship that he was constantly facing at his previous network. And he felt that if he discussed important issues, but used fantasy characters and settings to do so, more people would be willing to listen to him and his message. If he featured things that were like aliens and time travel, people would not be as easily offended to what he had to say. And this is a quote right here from him. I found that it was all right to have Martians saying things Democrats and Republicans could never say. If he featured real people in real situations, and he was talking about political issues, then he would risk offending one side and vice versa. But if it came from these make-believe characters, people didn't get as offended because they were make-believe, which is incredibly genius on his part. So here are some background things that are key to The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Mob mentality. So mob mentality is the idea that people can be influenced by their peers or large groups of people, and they can adopt certain emotions, actions, or behaviors. This is called herd behavior. With mob mentality, one loses the ability to think for himself or herself. Instead, they allow the emotions and behaviors of those around them to change how they normally would act. So a person who is normally calm, reasonable, kind, might become aggressive, panicked, or irrational. If you can hear that, I'm so sorry. My husband's working in our basement, and it's just part of it. Psychologically, one might find security in being part of the group, believing no harm will come upon him or her. So you adopt this idea that if a lot of people in your group are doing something, you can't get in trouble for what everyone else is doing. That is incredibly false, by the way. Some benefits to mob mentality. You have this loss of anonymity. You have a lack of consequences. When I say a loss of anonymity, it's harder to pick out individuals in a large crowd of people who were all doing the same thing. So Sigmund Freud was a famous psychologist, and he came up with this crowd behavior theory. Belonging to a group increases enthusiasm and reduces individual thinking, causing one to lose self-awareness. In other words, you become blinded by a false sense of security. A common phrase is, if so-and-so jumped off a bridge, would you do it? Here we've got some pictures. This person right here is a scapegoat, somebody who takes the blame for a group of people. You can see the people are ganging up on him. Mob mentality. Yeah, I wondered why anyone would ever want to think for themselves. You can see people just jumping off the cliff. And then you have this, it's a herd thing, and they're just following each other. You see this a lot with things like sports games. So people get really excited in a sporting event, and it can take a turn for the worse when a team loses and you have a small group of people who start causing chaos and uproar, and then it builds and people join in with them. Mob mentality has a great power over people, and it can take over your normal thought and make you act in a way that you normally would not. So communism is a political ideology that supports a government-controlled society. The United States is not a communist government. And this is a classless society that believes everything is shared equally, and it opposes capitalism. So when Rod Serling wrote The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street for an episode of The Twilight Zone, he was really concerned with this mob mentality that was taking over America. The country was experiencing this historical moment called the Red Scare. And the Red Scare involved this promotion of the fear of a rise in communism in the United States. We had communist countries at the time, and a lot of Americans were afraid that these other communist countries had sent spies over to America, and they were trying to overtake our government and overthrow our democracy and turn us into a communist country. Now, we had two Red Scares. The first one occurred in 1919, and then the second one occurred after World War II. And remember, Rod Serling fought in World War II. So the pursuit of suspected communists was called McCarthyism, after Senator Joseph McCarthy. People, especially government employees, were vetted to determine their loyalty to the United States government. And people were so afraid of communism and the country being overthrown by communists that they were willing to turn in people they suspected of being communists. And when people were turned in for being communists or communist sympathizers, a lot of people lost their jobs, or they were ostracized, which means that their friends, families, neighbors stopped talking to them. They wouldn't have anything to do with them. Now, the bad thing about Senator McCarthyism is he often charged people with being communists or communist sympathizers with little or no evidence. And we know that in our government, we have to have evidence to be found guilty. And this period was marked by a lot of mistrust and suspicion. So people were turning against each other. They didn't believe one another. They were very suspicious of each other. Now, if you want to know more about Senator McCarthy and or communism, you can visit these two links here. You don't have to do so, but just if you find it interesting, you can go there. So The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street features this normal, quiet suburban neighborhood that experiences something incredibly extraordinary. Inexplicably, which means you can't explain it, everything loses power, even the cars and the lawnmowers. And quickly, we see these neighbors who were once very friendly with each other become suspicious of each other, much like the Red Scare. And they adopt this mob mentality. So you're going to see how quickly people lose the ability to think logically and individually. And this allows the group to influence their behaviors and thoughts. That means they no longer act the way they normally would. They allow others to dictate their thoughts and their actions. This is an incredibly real and scary experience. We've seen this in the past, the Salem witch trials, the Holocaust, even with the COVID-19 pandemic. I want you, as you're reading this, to think about the message Rod Serling is trying to share with this episode. What does he want us to learn? So here we've got, click on the Bitmoji for the script, which is the PDF copy of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. So when you click on me reading, it's going to take you to the script so that you can read it on your own. This is going to be for the kids who are virtual. If you are traditional, Miss Robertson is giving you your own paper copy of the script. So we've got the script here. Okay, when we go back, if you click on this Bitmoji, you can listen to the reading of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. So it takes you to a YouTube link. And you can listen to me read it to you. Last thing, if you are interested in watching The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, and I highly encourage you to do that, it is so good. You can find the episode on Netflix. I think most of you have Netflix. If you will search The Twilight Zone, you can find The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street in Season 1, Episode 22. Now, The Twilight Zone is one of my favorite series. I highly recommend you watch the other episodes for some really delightful creepiness. I know you did not expect that from me. I mean, why would Miss Gann ever want to watch something creepy? If you do not have Netflix, I'm sorry. You can watch these clips of The Twilight Zone here. I think it was Jordan Peele who has started remaking several episodes of The Twilight Zone. I don't know if he's covered The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. If you watch the original, this one right here, Season 1, Episode 22, on Netflix, you will see that it is identical to the script that you are reading. That's because this script was written for television, so it should be exactly the same. When you are done reading the story, you will go back to Schoology and you are going to fill out a Freytag pyramid that covers the plot of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, and you will turn that in.